A Boy and His Rock. Raindrops fell from heavy skies, rolling slowly down the window in front of Laurel, a chill from the cool fall air somehow running into the car and through her body. It made her shudder a little, straighten her back involuntarily, and gave her an ominous feeling. She didn't recognize what was causing this feeling, but it could be and probably was this new place she was in, dark and dreary as it was. A new town, Parliament. She and her family in the car were just on the outskirts of it, driving down curvy roads past dark and looming trees, part of a very large, non-industrialized forest that in some parts, as far as Laurel could tell from the window she found herself constantly staring out of, appeared to have trees that were as ancient as, well, her parents, or older, she supposed, recognizing that trees did in fact live a lot longer, but yet unable to get rid herself of the frustration she was feeling. She wondered when those feelings would dissipate, and they could go back to being a happy, somewhat functional family. She hoped it was soon, but she wasn't holding her breath. How much longer, she asked her mother. Lauren. She'd been named after her, but with a twist. An L instead of an N. Clever, she thought to herself as she thought of her name's origin in a dark, sarcastic sort of way. Not much longer, said her mom in a positive, upbeat sort of way, though Laurel could tell that her mother was having similar feelings as she was concerning where they were. That's how she normally was, always making the best of things. It was one of her best qualities, Laurel had to admit. She was a nurse who mainly took care of babies, so it was no wonder why she was always so happy. Though Laurel knew she wouldn't be happy at all with a job like that. She wished she was more like her, but unfortunately she was more like her father. We'll be there in 6 minutes, said her father, James, precisely, showing as little emotion as was probably humanly possible. That was how he was, very serious, but he accomplished a lot, and underneath it all, he was actually a very creative, out-of-the-box sort of man. His time in the military had kept him disciplined, and his time fighting in the war, which was still raging in the north of the continent, had forced him into a state of constant vigilance, planning and set him in a serious demeanor, but he still retained much of his innate curiosity about the world. The downside was his constant seriousness. Now it was just amplified. It bothered Laurel, probably because she was supposed to be the serious one in whatever relationship she was in with anyone. And she'd been used to living with her mother, as her father had been away for many years in the war, rightly nicknamed the Northern Struggle. She hadn't seen him for over 5 years until a year ago. It was a miracle he'd even come back, but naturally, there was still some distance between the two of them. The more she got to know him, the less that distance seemed to be, however, and she knew her feelings of frustration would eventually subside, probably for this reason alone. She wanted a father again. 6 minutes, he repeated after Laurel didn't respond. Good, she muttered, crossing her arms and turning her head back to stare out the window. Her mother smiled at her, somehow still at least a little bit happy about moving, even though she'd had to leave her business behind. She'd run a daycare and had done very well at it. Fortunately, the southern states government, their native country's government, had secured her a job at a local hospital, where she would work with newborns. One of the perks of being connected to the military, you were never out of a job, never out of something to do. Laurel didn't like the military, but she recognized that it was something that her dad believed in and was very passionate about. She couldn't tell whether or not he thought that way because he was supposed to or because he wanted to, but she suspected that it was both sides of the coin and not just one or the other. Look, said her father. Dear. Laurel noticed them almost immediately as she was already looking out the window, but her mother took a moment to see. As soon as she did, she smiled. They're beautiful, she said. But they taste even more beautiful, grinned her father. James, Laurel's mother said in a disapproving manner. Laurel laughed a little bit. Her father had turned out to have a sense of humor similar to her own. She thought that was lucky. You think that's funny? Her father smiled, looking back at her in the rearview mirror. Laurel shrugged. Kind of. Her father smiled. 4 minutes. The mood lightened, but the forest only seemed to grow darker. Was it just Laurel, or were the clouds condensing? It seemed almost black, like a storm was set to occur, and soon. The anticipation, maybe, made Laurel uneasy. She didn't like this feeling, though she couldn't put her finger on why she was feeling it. Storms didn't normally bother her. She noticed that her father was shifting a bit in his chair, but now her mother was quite relaxed. It was as if something was going to, and maybe was supposed to, happen, but it wasn't something good. Could her father feel that too? Laurel shook her head and stared back out the window again. Within a few minutes they were in Parliament, downtown, which was actually quite large considering the town's size of only about 15,000. Quaint shops occupied the buildings along the streets, most quite brightly colored. There were many side streets and alleys as well, giving the downtown area a feeling of largeness. The courthouse, too, was very large and bright white, made out of some sort of material akin to granite, but simply brighter and better. It wasn't painted. Laurel wondered what it was. Soon they were down a street with somewhat large houses closely connected to each other, each separated by a small patch of lawn. Many were identical, but there was some variation between the houses, and even a few larger houses with larger lawns. One might have even had a pool. Laurel didn't bother to get her hopes up about having one of those, however. She'd seen pictures of the house she and her family would live in. It wasn't small, but it was far from large. She supposed she would be happy enough in it after a time, but it might take a while. Her issues were less with its size and more with its location. After only a minute of driving from downtown, they had arrived at their new home. It was a quaint white house with a small yard and a black iron-wrought fence with a unique arrowhead designed for each post. It was just above waist height, Laurel noted. Less for keeping people out and more for the aesthetic of a nice but old and vaguely medieval house. Seeing it in person, Lauren was reassured. This wasn't a bad place to live in. She supposed that she could walk downtown too sometimes, which would be nice, though she knew she didn't want to go by herself. She would be stuck with her parents for at least a little while longer. "We're here," her father stated. "Let's unpack. Laurel, help your mother with some of the stuff in the back. I'll start on the trunk." "Okay," Laurel muttered, sighing as her father made his way back to the trunk. She opened her door and started to grab some of the bags that were lying next to her in the back. Her mother opened the other door and did the same. They quickly finished, went to the front door, and waited on their father. Her father. They both assumed he had the key. It was a couple moments before he was prepared to carry the bags over, as he was attempting to carry too many at once by Laurel's estimation. In those few moments she noticed someone looking at her. When she peered over her shoulder and to the left, she noticed a boy. It was he who was looking at her. Casually he looked down at something he had in his hand. What it was she couldn't tell, but he tossed it up and caught it like a rock, and lingered leaning on the front door of his house. They were neighbors. Said Laurel under her breath. She wondered who he was. "Oh," Laurel's father said, "Key." "Right." He set down the bags he was carrying, reached into his pocket pretty smoothly for an old man, though he's only 38, and unlocked the door. There, he stated, sighing and shrugging. "Welcome home, girls." Laurel rolled her eyes, but her mother smiled and said politely, "Thank you, dear." "No problem," said Laurel's father, noticing Laurel's gaze. "Who's that?" her father asked, nodding towards the boy, trying to sound positive. "How would I know?" said Laurel. "We just moved here." "Right," said her father, grinning. Laurel smiled a little too. "Can we get inside, please?" Her father nodded. When Laurel looked again, the boy had disappeared, probably back inside of his house, if it was his house. The three of them went inside, closing the door behind them. The inside was bigger than Laurel expected, or it appeared that way. The ceilings were high, and the front hallway seemed long with a couple entrances to different rooms. One was the kitchen, she discovered, the other a living room, or spare room for whatever someone might want to put in it. She supposed it would be their living room. The upstairs was smaller, and although the house was old, it seemed new. There was a bathroom and 4 rooms upstairs. Laurel had made her way upstairs faster than everyone else and was inspecting the rooms, trying to choose which one might be hers. "Have you chosen a room yet?" Laurel's father said, startling her. "Whoa," she said, putting her hand over her chest. "Don't do that." He nodded. "So?" "Not yet," said Laurel, actually kind of excited. "Maybe that one across the hall?" He nodded, looking into it. "Seems like a good one." "Which one do you want?" she asked him. He shrugged. "That one." "You can't just pick the one I just picked. That's rude," she grinned. He shrugged. "First come, first serve." "Fine," she said. "I'll take this one." "Don't you want to see the other ones?" he asked. "Might be better." "No," she said. "The view's better." Her father grinned and sighed. "Just be careful. You don't know him yet." "What?" she said, looking down at her hands like she'd been caught stealing a cookie out of the jar. "Look, I'm not going to hold you back whenever you start, dating," her father said, somewhat awkwardly. "But don't do anything that you're going to regret, and be careful who you choose to be with." He pointed his finger at her warily and looked to his side. "That's important." "I know," she said defensively. "I'm 17, Dad, I know." "Exactly, you're 17. What?" she said. "I've done fine so far." Her father nodded, sensing an argument, and backed off. "I trust you to make the right call, but," he added before ending, "I will say something if I have to." "Thanks for the talk, Dad," she said, annoyed. He grinned and walked into the room across the hall. "I'm going to take this one," he pointed behind him. "Think Mom will be okay with your choice?" She will, he said, looking down and back up again. Grab the rest of the stuff out of the trunk, will you? Fine, said Laurel. Thanks. Laurel walked to the trunk to grab a few bags. When she leaned over, she heard something behind her. Hey. She turned around, dropping the bags. Damn it, she said. It was the boy. Sorry, he chuckled, tossing his rock up in the air. You scared the shit out of me. That's my bad, he laughed again. Laurel took a moment to calm down, but then managed to collect herself and asked, Who are you? We're neighbors, he started with. I'm Joseph. Oh, she said, I'm Laurel. He nodded. I saw you come in, thought I'd introduce myself. Well, she said, smiling, quite a way to do it. Yeah, he trailed off, looking away. He kept tossing his rock. What's that? Asked Laurel. A rock? It was black, but somehow it seemed even darker than black, if that were possible. Kind of, he said. Well, what's it made out of? Joseph shrugged. Doesn't interest me. Oh, she said, now trailing off herself. Joseph noticed and added, I've thought about it, but I'm not sure. Why do you keep it? Laurel asked. He shrugged again. It's my favorite thing. Why? Just is. Laurel thought that was very strange. She started to feel a little uncomfortable, though she didn't dislike Joseph. Well, I'd better go inside, she said, picking up the bags and turning towards the house. You want to see something weird, he said. She turned around. What? Come on, he said, as serious as a broken bone. He walked away. Laurel was beyond surprise. I have to, she said, but stopped as she could see that he was already a good distance away down the sidewalk. She sighed and set the bags back in the trunk, shutting the trunk to make sure nobody stole anything. Okay, she muttered. She followed him down the street, running to catch up with him. Hey, she said, when she finally caught up. Where are we going? You'll see, he said, tossing his rock. He was good at catching that thing. Okay, she said, somehow believing him. They walked in silence the rest of the way. Eventually they passed downtown, and eventually after that they reached a forest that might have been part of the same forest that Laurel and her father and her family had passed on the way into town. Laurel hesitated at it for a moment, but against her better judgment went in after him after he didn't turn to answer her once again. Why was she following him? What was so interesting? She supposed she would find out. After a few minutes they reached a river. Joseph a little ahead of Laurel. He said, Here, he said, a wave of excitement coming over Joseph. Come here, he waved her over. What? Laurel yelled. What is it, a river? He shook his head and grinned as she approached. Not just a river. Look. She looked. I don't see anything. You can't see anything, he asked, sighing. Damn. What am I supposed to be seeing? He sighed. Again, frustratingly, running his fingers through his hair. Maybe I really am crazy. Laurel shook her head. Well, what am I supposed to be seeing? Nothing, he said. Never mind, forget about it. Laurel sighed too, tired from the trek. Well, that was a waste of time. She sat down on a rock near the river, rubbing her legs. Joseph sat down on a nearby rock as well. What do you see? Asked Laurel, feeling sympathetic towards Joseph. Obviously he was seeing something, maybe something that wasn't even there. He shook his head. When I look in that one spot, he said, pointing. When I look there, it's all black and I can see myself as clear as if a mirror is there. Really? Asked Laurel. Weird, I can't see that. I know, he nodded. Great, I'm nuts. You don't know that, she said. I think I do, he muttered, looking down as if thinking. Wait. What? She said. He tossed her the rock. Catch. She caught it. Look at the river. She looked. Oh my God. He nodded. It's my father's rock. That's how you see it.